So as Russia intensifies its attack on Ukraine, here are the latest developments in the ongoing situation. At least about 5 people are said to have been killed in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev after the Russian airstrikes hit the Kievan television tower. Before the attack, the Russian military had warned the residents of Kiev to leave from the city, saying that it would carry out strikes against facilities in the capital. Now, a US official has said that the miles-long armored column bearing down on the capital city of Kiev has not made any advances in the last 24 hours. It is frozen in its place by logistical problems, short on fuel and food, and also perhaps pausing to reassess their tactics. Kharkiv, the second largest city in the country, has also seen an intensified shelling and airstrikes on Tuesday. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that Russia must stop bombing Ukrainian cities before any meaningful talks of a ceasefire can begin. Remember, the first round of negotiations earlier on Monday had yielded virtually no breakthrough. So a second round of talks between a Ukrainian and a Russian delegation is expected to take place later in the day today.
Ми про діалог. Я вважаю, так, треба припинити хоча б бомбардування людей. Просто бомбардування припинити і після цього сісти за стіл перемовин. Партнери, якщо вони не готові брати Україну в НАТО, і якщо вони не готові брати Україну в НАТО через те, що Росія не хоче, щоб Україна була в НАТО, то є гарантії безпеки, напрацьовані спільні для України.
Volodymyr Zelensky also spoke to President Joe Biden and discussed as to how the United States and its allies are working to hold Russia accountable. Airstrikes were also reported in northern Ukraine. Now, on your screens will be these visuals from the city of Zhytomyr. Private homes were hit and at least about 4 people have been killed so far. Meanwhile, the World Court will be hearing Ukraine's case seeking a halt to Moscow's military actions on the 7th and the 8th of March. Now, the court, formerly known as the International Court of Justice, is the United Nations venue for resolving disputes between the states. As fighting continues into its 7th straight day, the United States and 30 other nations have agreed to release about 60 million barrels of oil from their strategic reserves to try and stabilize the global energy markets. Big American brands are also distancing themselves from Russia, and the latest, of course, to do this is Apple. But it also includes companies like Google, Ford and Harley-Davidson. Russia, for its part, has said that it sees no desire from Ukraine to try and find a legitimate and a balanced solution to the problems between the two countries. Interestingly, amongst this, the American President Joe Biden will be celebrating the West's unity against the Russian invasion of Ukraine in a State of the Union speech. The ongoing crisis between Russia and Ukraine is likely to overshadow domestic politics, and excerpts released from the White House say that Biden will be calling on Putin's action as a clear case of an unprovoked war. Now, the annual State of the Union speech, of course, has a new focus this year. Typically, it is a chance for the US president to address domestic issues. But this year, Russian aggression against Ukraine will, of course, be discussed. And just hours before the address at a joint session with the Congress, Biden held a 30-minute phone call with the American President Volodymyr Zelensky. And this was, of course, to discuss as to how the United States could further help in arming Ukraine's military. Now, Zelensky is currently sheltering in Kiev. He has pleaded to stop the aggressor as soon as possible. Now, Putin has also ordered for a full-scale invasion against its neighbor. Americans, of course, are divided over Biden's role in this crisis. Some Republicans have blamed Joe Biden for the Russian invasion into Ukraine. Some have praised him for determining strategy to shame the Kremlin. And during his speech, Biden will, of course, touch upon how he rallied the world to put severe sanctions on Moscow. He's also likely to refer to his frequent warnings that the world's democracies are in a bit of an existential struggle. Now, to give us more updates in terms of the State of the Union address in the United States by Joe Biden, we are joined in by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who is joining us live from New York. Now, Susan, this is going to be a very interesting address by the American president. What is he likely to speak on?
Really, the first time a U.S. president is giving a State of the Union address at such a consequential time, and perhaps when there is such a wide-scale land war happening in Europe since 1945. He will be highlighting NATO's unity and America's ability to rally around a unified stance against Russia's invasion into Ukraine. But he will also try to touch upon domestic issues as well. We've been told that he will address the issue of inflation, something that's on the mind of many American people. But also, there is issues regarding high crime rates, and the general atmosphere here in the United States right now is that of fatigue and frustration, not only because of inflation, high crime rates, but also coming out of a 2-year pandemic with the mandates and a climate of uncertainty because of kitchen table issues. The president will be hard-pressed to convince the American people that the war in Ukraine is important. It's a war against democracy, and that's something that his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky, really pressed him on doing. He urged Biden earlier today to deliver a strong, quote, useful message about the Russian invasion at his State of the Union, saying that if Ukraine is invaded by Russia, then Russia will be at the doorstep of NATO countries. Perhaps a jab and a warning to NATO member states and the United States saying that they don't want to engage directly in a war with Russia, ruling out a no-fly zone against Ukraine, and also committing to not sending any troops into that country, not only the United States but NATO member states as well. So he's got a full plate in front of him.
Absolutely indeed. Now, according to the reports that have come, and it's being said that he in fact wants to celebrate in some ways the West's unity in terms of how it has responded to this Russian invasion. But for people who are looking in terms of how the West has responded, some people would of course say that the response by the West has been very slow and has really not created any kind of deterrence for the Russian state from launching this invasion into Ukraine.
Right. You know, while perhaps the sanctions that were initially imposed against Russia were deemed to be weak, at this point, there is a unified stance that at least these sanctions right now will bite hard against the Russian economy, especially those leveled against the central bank. And there are those who are now saying that Biden's actions were too little too late in providing the proper military aid to the Ukrainian people, and they're hoping that perhaps this administration would pump up that country's insurgency as it had promised before. But also there's the issue of the oil and gas sector. That is really a dividing issue here in the United States. On the one hand, there is overwhelming support, not only among Republicans but Democrats as well, that the United States at the end of the day, and not Russia, but it's the United States that's the largest exporter of oil in the world. And because of certain policies of this administration, for example, halting a very large Keystone pipeline at the beginning of the administration through an executive order, there's been setbacks, and perhaps more open energy policies would allow for the United States and NATO allies to have the ability to sanction Russian oil and gas and really target that sector, as opposed to pulling back and asking other countries like OPEC members to provide that sort of gas. So yes, you know, those are issues that definitely will be addressed by President Biden, but it's going to be very difficult for him to also talk about some of his accomplishments as well, because, you know, he's had some economic accomplishments, but they've sort of fallen back because of the current state of the world, because of the criticism he's faced regarding his foreign policy blunders, not only in Afghanistan, perhaps some are Ukraine as well, but also because of inflation. That's really hitting home for a lot of Americans, and gas prices is at top of that list right now. Again, going back to oil and gas,
right.
And he's going to probably blame it on Russia for now.
Absolutely, indeed. So thank you very much indeed, Susan Tehrani, for joining us and getting us all those insights. We'll, of course, come back to you once we've heard from President Biden in his State of the Nation address. And it'll be very interesting to see as to what the American president, of course, has got to say in this crucial interview, in this crucial address. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.